curve. Let's look at the different demand shifters here. An increase in demand is a shift of the entire curve to the right, as seen in this picture here. All right, that's an increase in demand. Decrease in demand is a shift of the entire demand curve to the left, right? There are 4 demand shifters according to our textbook. Sometimes there's different ways of separating these ideas in different textbooks, whatever, but in the textbook that we use, there are 4 separate demand shifters. They are the number of consumers, wealth, preferences, and the prices of other goods. So let's look at each of these in turn, just quickly. The first one is the number of consumers. Obviously, with more consumers, we have more demand. With fewer consumers, we have less demand. Income also influences demand. Again, this is not to be confused with price. This is income of the individuals. Demand curves reflect the willingness and ability to buy a good, service, or resource, all else held constant. Income is one of the variables that is held constant. So if income changes, consumers' willingness and ability to buy a good, service, or resource changes as well, resulting in a new demand relationship. When consumers have more or less to spend, the demand curve shifts. More to spend, generally speaking, with a normal good, more demand. Preferences is the next shifter of the demand. This is a rather obvious influencer of demand. If something becomes more popular, then there's more demand out there. If it becomes less popular, there's less demand, right? We can look at this graph here. In this graph, is the item becoming more or less popular? This is an increase in demand. This item has increased in consumers' preferences. It's more popular than it used to be. Right? So we see this increase in demand. So a shift of the entire curve to the right. When 2 goods are closely related, the change in the price of one good can impact the demand of the other good. So our 4th shifter here is this idea of prices of related goods. So in economics, goods that are closely related to one another fall into 2 broad categories: substitutes and complements. So we can look at the definition of substitutes. Substitutes are goods, services, or other resources that are viewed as replacements for one another. You can think of examples of, say, Coke and Pepsi, corn syrup and sugar, almonds and peanuts, pens and pencils, watching TV at home, going to the movies, things like that. So let's say you have 2 options for transportation: going on the bus or taking the subway. What do you think will happen in this scenario? If bus prices rise, the demand for the subway will rise, should be the answer. We can think of an increase in demand via substitutes. An increase in the price of one good, say with these graphs here, if we have an increase in the price of Pepsi, so Pepsi's price has increased, we have moved from price 1 over to price 2, right? Price has gone up, right? What happens to the demand for the substitute? An increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. For substitutes, the relationship is such that if the price of one good rises, the demand for the other rises. Why? Well, when bus prices went up, you had a substitute, something else you could switch to. And now that bus rides are so expensive, you switch to riding on the subway. So the demand for subways goes up, right? Or the same thing with Coke and Pepsi. If you see those as substitutes for one another, if the price of Pepsi goes up, you say, I got to switch to something else. Pepsi's getting really expensive here. So your demand for Coca-Cola goes up. Here, though, we have complements. Complements are kind of the opposite of this. Complements, the definition here is they are goods, services, or resources that are used or consumed with one another. Not instead of, but with one another. Examples, you can think of peanut butter and jelly, chips and guacamole, chicken wings and ranch dressing, smartphones and apps, boats and water skis, etc., right? These are things that are used with one another. So let's think about how complements are different. We'll give you a little challenge question with this. What do you think will happen if dorm prices rise? What happens to the demand for college classes? If dorm prices and college classes are consumed together, which kind of makes sense here, an increase in dorm prices should cause the demand for college classes to diminish. These are things that are consumed together. And now all of a sudden, man, living in the dorms is really expensive. So now I don't know if I want to live in the dorms because, it's really expensive. And because I don't know if I want to live in the dorms, now I'm not even sure I want to take any college classes. They're at least linked a little bit together, right? We consume these ideas together, to consume these assets, or the classes and the dorms together, right? We consume both of these goods together. Just another example here. Here, what happens first is we have this increase in the price of peanut butter, and we want to know what happens to the demand for jelly. And so we see this increase in the price of peanut butter, and so now peanut butter is kind of expensive to purchase. And so what happens to your demand for jelly? Man, I always consume peanut butter and jelly together. Peanut butter, it's really expensive now. I don't really want to consume as much peanut butter because it's so pricey. So now my demand for jelly, which I consume along with peanut butter, is going to go down. I don't need as much jelly because I'm not going to get as much peanut butter, and so I'm not going to consume those two things together as much.